It is, it's a pretty interesting piece of engineering. And I think it's, for me, really interesting just in the bigger context of what the iPad is doing and what Apple is trying to do with the iPad, and how it's kind of surprising actually just that this thing exists. So, first things first, as SN37 was saying, this guy is really, really heavy. It is 600 grams. I even have a scale here so we can compare some other keyboards. So 600 grams is heavier than the iPad itself. And it really is just spot on 600 exactly. And for comparison, the original, this is the iPad Folio, Smart Folio keyboard. This is only 295 grams. So essentially double the weight of the original. And then the iPad itself, just to kind of bring everything in here, is barely just about 500. And so this thing is a seriously heavy piece of kit to add to what's otherwise quite a svelte computing platform slash device thing. So it is heavy. That is the first thing you notice about it. And let's see here. I can understand why SN37 is returning his. I actually owned a Bridge keyboard. I bought maybe about a year ago. The Bridge without the trackpad, obviously. And I kept that for about a week and then I returned it. A few issues with the Bridge, aside from it being heavy. It was extremely heavy, even though I looked up the stats and I sold it, but I looked up the stats and it actually weighs less than this. I think it was about 550 grams. So the Bridge had a couple of problems. One was the weight, but the other was the way the iPad sat in the device. You had to slot it into these weird kind of tight little hinges, and then the hinges itself didn't feel that good. And so I feel like this new iPad Magic keyboard is kind of fixing a lot of those problems. So it is really heavy. It's made of the exact same kind of disgusting rubber that the Smart Folio is made of, which I find really a little bit depressing. This is my least favorite texture, I think, or material that Apple makes anything out of. And I really would have loved some kind of, I don't know, like a cloth option or leather or pleather, just something besides this rubber. The rubber works really well on the Folio because the whole thing is kind of rubberized, and so you get, you know, complete protection from dust and from water and liquids and stuff like that. Whereas on this guy, the new one, it is totally open and vulnerable to elements. And the rubber is just on this outside surface, but then also on this palm rest area. But the keys themselves, like I said, are ABS plastic, not PBT. So the construction of it feels incredible. I think that's probably the most impressive element of this keyboard, is just how strong this hinge feels, how precise both of these hinges feel, because there are two hinges here. And so this first hinge, when it's closed, it doesn't snap closed, but it feels just solid. And then it opens to about 80 degrees, and when it gets to 80, it just snaps really solidly. And you can see that there is this kind of metal piece in here that's coming up into this lower part of the second hinge. And honestly, the structural rigidity of this thing is impressive. I can put significant pressure on this plate and get almost no bending. Even on this back panel, which is kind of what's even more impressive, is that I'm pushing quite hard on this and getting almost no flex. In comparison, you can look at the Smart Folio, and this guy is very bendy, extremely bendy. This thing is super bendy. So a big part of the weight is just this rigidity which is required for the hinge, and then also for the mechanics of this keyboard, and I suspect in big part for the mechanics of the trackpad, which this trackpad is not taptic. it is actually physically moving. It's not really visible, but it does move. What's impressive is that it moves equally in every direction. So there are no hot spots or weak spots on the trackpad. So that's kind of a neat bit of engineering. The second hinge, so the first hinge is from 0 to 80 degrees, and the second hinge kind of goes the rest of the way. From 80 to 130 is this maximum angle. And this hinge also feels like an impressive feat of engineering. I'd love, I'm sure someone's going to cut this open in the next day or two. It'd be really interesting to see what's going on in here, because I feel like, I don't know, I feel like there's just so much work being put into hinges, maybe even more work into the hinges than the keys themselves, one might say. But as a piece of engineering, I am impressed. The pass-through port, it works. It works just for power. I did a very informal test where I charged for 10 minutes using the pass-through port, and I charged for 10 minutes using the normal USB-C port on the side, and the USB Type-C port charges about twice as fast as the pass-through, which kind of makes sense because the only power sort of connector that's happening here is through this smart connector on the back. So that is the trade-off of using this versus using USB Type-C. As for the keyboard, it's pretty good. It's actually the same 1 millimeter of travel as the butterfly mechanism on recent MacBook Pro keyboards. Even though perceptually, I would say it feels like I have my butterfly keyboard on my right hand over here. I'd say perceptually this feels like it has about 50% more travel, even though the technical specs say it's the same 1 millimeter. They do jiggle a bit. There's kind of a little bit of a tinginess to them. If you don't push through, push all the way down, that is a little bit disappointing. Just doesn't feel completely solid. And I find on the butterfly keyboard, actually, you get less of that. So that seems to be one of the trade-offs, is that the kind of stability of the keys feels ever so slightly less stable than on butterfly mechanisms. But the travel feels good. It bottoms out in kind of a pleasing way. And it's not too loud. It's just a good, quiet, standard keyboard noise. Now, if you have one of the Magic keyboards, they're all called Magic keyboards, but if you have the other Magic keyboard, you can see here the iPad Smart Magic keyboard. iPad Magic keyboard? iPad Smart keyboard? It's very smart and magical. Is about 20% smaller than the Magic keyboard here. And what's interesting is that the key size is actually the same, 1.5 centimeters square on both of these, where the Magic or Smart keyboard fails, or where it saves 20%, are in keys like the tilde is extremely sort of truncated, the tab key is super small, caps lock, shift, kind of all these keys have been kind of shrunken relative to the full-size main body keys. This is the 11-inch, so the 12-inch might have full-size keys across the whole board. But in terms of tactility, these feel almost identical. Almost 100% identical. Maybe they are the exact same mechanism. So that's kind of interesting. What's funny is just how light this keyboard is. This thing weighs nothing. This is, what is this? This is like, this guy is only 232.5 grams. It's pretty light. This is an incredibly light device. It's pretty amazing. I also dug out, because I have a whole basically closet full of keyboards, I dug out an old Logitech, or as it's called in Japan, Logicool. Yes, it's called Logicool in Japan. A Logicool keyboard for the iPad mini. And I used to use this with the iPad mini as my hiking computer, because the iPad mini was so small and yet capable. And this was the only keyboard option for that device. And it worked well, it worked fine. These keys are actually, they're smaller than those. I bet they're about we can actually measure them, but I bet they're about 1 centimeter. Let's see. 1 point, looks like it's about 1.3. So it's about 2 millimeters smaller than the keys on the Smart keyboard, or the Magic keyboard. And I use this a bunch, man. I used to, because this weighs nothing. We have this scale out, might as well weigh it. This thing weighs absolutely nothing. 220 grams. And then coupled with the iPad mini, it was basically it was about a 500 gram typing machine that it felt nearly waterproof, or at least really water resistant. You could put it in a dry sack, and you could take it anywhere with you out in the woods, and the battery lasted forever if you weren't using Wi-Fi or anything. You were just using it to take notes. And so I used this keyboard for years. And I hadn't dug it out in about 2 or 3 years. And when I took it out, I was actually surprised. These keys feel amazing. These keys feel so good. The actuation pressure on them is just right. They actually feel, and sorry to the Apple designers, but I think they feel ever so slightly better than the keys over on this one. It's like, it might be the smaller size that's changing the perception of it, but yeah, very, very interesting. Big shock pulling this thing back out. But what a great device, and charged with USB, just a tiny little USB port there on the bottom that is now coming into focus. There it is. Had an on-off switch. It was a great little device. Back to this guy. So, how does it work with the iPad on it? I guess we can take a peek. So I think one of the great innovations of this design, it's both a positive and a negative, is that it really sort of rewards you for taking the iPad off and using it as a tablet, because it's so easy and satisfying to put this thing on and pull it off, that I found myself today taking it off to kind of do tablet-y things in a way that I hadn't in a long time with this. I normally just keep it in this old folio all the time. So something about just the way this is designed, and the weight of the case itself and the keyboard itself kind of keeps it on the desk. It feels like it, not entirely, so you can still pick it up with this and it comes off the desk, but it feels natural to kind of like use the weight of the keyboard itself to kind of pull this off. And it just comes off in a really beautiful way. And I think it's in part because of this material, and because of the obviously the magnet system that is happening in the back here. And so it's a very satisfying noise. If you just, oh, it's so nice. And it just feels good. So even that right there. So you can hear, or maybe you can't hear, my fans are running, and I have a heater on in the background. But this, as you move this upper hinge back to completion, the magnets kind of kick in on the bottom there and complete that angle push. And then manipulating this top hinge with the iPad in place is also very satisfying. It's just the weight and the balance between The friction on the hinges and the weight of the iPad itself just feels so dialed in. I mean, it really feels like you're using something that people give a shit about. So this is one negative of this is that opening this is not as effortless as I'd like it to be. So in this position, you kind of have to shove a finger into the bottom here, because there's no natural, like on a MacBook, where there's no natural lip. I wonder if I get rid of the pencil, if it's a little easier. No. So there's no natural lip to kind of open this, so you kind of have to wedge your fingers in below over here, and then you can get it open. And it opens like this very smoothly, and then stops at 80 degrees, boom. And then you just keep pushing, and you have total freedom because of the friction of the hinge between 80 and 130, which is the max. So you can see the total angle differential from this view. And there's the magnet snap coming back down. Very satisfying. And here's the complete. So, and then there's a little bit of there's kind of a activation bump here between fully open and starting to close. And then once you get over that initial bump, it's just completely smooth to closing. And then opening up. And then you can see, you just keep pushing on the top here, and then that second hinge sort of auto-activates. And it feels, again, the really impressive stuff is that even though this hinge looks so relatively delicate, it feels like it's going to hold that angle no matter what. So I set that angle, and I can kind of, that was the magnet kind of pulling it back. I set the angle, and you can kind of, I don't know, you can kind of jiggle it, and it really doesn't move. It feels very solid. Typing on your lap, totally cool. The one problem is that the weight, obviously, distribution here is different than on a laptop. And again, this is part of why I think this thing has to be so heavy, and this bottom plate is the bulk of the weight. It's just offset the weight of the iPad itself. And so we can see here how far it can be pushed and still not fall over. So it gets about there, if there makes any sense on this video. But it gets about, yeah, you have to go kind of over 45 degrees for it to really start to go in the other direction. And then, of course, it really wants to fall backwards. So I'd say using it on your lap, the biggest concern would be this thing flopping over onto the floor in a way that a laptop never will. Let me see here, some questions popping up. So let's see, what's the model of Logicool? So what model is this? This thing is definitely not made anymore. I have no idea what model this is. This was just the Logicool iPad mini model. No idea. And this was the whole thing. And I forget even what's going on with this hinge here, but it worked. The iPad kind of sat very precariously in this slot here. It worked. It worked. I wouldn't use it in a moving a go-kart, but it worked. Let's see here. What else? What other questions? I'm sold. Totally want to get an iPad mini with that. Yeah, it is. You know, I think there's something to be said about smaller computing devices that, you know, will enable this. Really, there's nothing like this today. There's nothing of this size, and you know, when you put this completely flat, I guess the iPad would kind of snap onto here. It was like the size of a Kindle Oasis with a cover on it. Boom, 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 boom. How are the angles it supports? So Thomas, hopefully that made sense. It goes from 80. I believe this is 80 degrees to 130. Talk about the trackpad a bit. Yeah. All right. So we can look at kind of what it feels like to use this thing in the OS. I'm going to turn this sideways because I have a non-optimal shooting setup here. But let's see here. Oh, let me put this in. I Face ID the wrong way too many times. So, using the trackpad, yeah, the trackpad feels fantastic. It is very small. That's the first thing that you notice obviously here, is that this trackpad is literally like a, this is, so for comparison, this is kind of, I love how big this trackpad is. This is the Magic Trackpad 2, Bluetooth trackpad, and I mean, look at this thing. Look at how big this thing is. It is literally half the size of this keyboard if you put it like this. That's insane. This trackpad is so big. Do we need trackpads this big before in our life? I don't know. I kind of feel like in some ways this might be too big of a trackpad. So if you own this one, got wool sweater all over it. If you own this trackpad, for comparison, it is significantly smaller. It's about a quarter of it. And you feel the difference mainly in the height. So yeah, it is tiny. One of the problems with the height being this size is that pinching and zooming obviously is kind of neutered, right? So you're just not getting the same, breadth and kind of openness of pinching and zooming. So in Google Maps or whatever, you do feel constrained. You feel kind of the constraint of that trackpad size. But the trackpad itself, very fast, very tactile. Going to Ulysses, it just, 2-finger swiping feels great. 3-finger, it's really immediate. You can see there's almost no lag whatsoever. When you're sitting here and using it if I look at it on the camera, it looks like there's a little more lag than it feels when you're looking and using it and doing it, manipulating it directly. The 3-finger swipes just feel great. I feel like the iPad OS team has just dialed in the physics of the operating system in the last 6 months to a year, and it just feels fantastic to kind of pop out of these things, pop into them, go up into multitask mode, do all these different things. And even pulling out, like, say, for example, this sidebar, and then switching through this sidebar, for example, and doing these kind of weird flips between sort of sidebar windows. Even though the sidebar interface is in and of itself a little bit wacky, you have to slam the cursor against the side of the screen. That's how you activate this sidebar, and it doesn't always activate. Kind of hokey. And then you do three-finger swipes on top of this to move between the different elements of the sidebar. And this is a document of all the bread I've been making over the last month, all the different pizzas and loaves, as any respectable quarantine person is doing. So let's see what questions are popping up. Yeah, so Michael, the trackpad feels essentially exactly like it does on the MacBook Air or MacBook Pro. Logi Ultra Thin Mini. Yeah, probably that could be it. What do you find compelling about this keyboard over the Smart keyboard? This keyboard, the Magic Keyboard versus the Folio, is this? The naming of all these things is so ridiculous. If you mean this as the Smart, oh, that's making a. Oh, I was like, this is making a very strange noise, and the magnets had picked up a mint case I had brought back from the Mampe Hotel I did a 45-day walk last year. And I stopped and stayed at the Mampe for 2 nights, and it was wonderful. And this is a case of mints that I kept, and it was stuck to the case. What do I find compelling? Let's see here about this. If this is the question, this keyboard versus this one, this is just way more tactile. I mean, these are real keys in a sense. These are also real keys, but it feels kind of gummy, and there's very little travel. But it's good. It's good for what it is. And I would say for the price, And when you think about the durability of this guy, this thing is so durable and relatively inexpensive, certainly compared to the this one and the Magic one. And I feel like because of the weight, you could actually carry two of these. Like say you're doing field work and you need to have a reliable device, and you're using the iPad and you want to have a keyboard, you could easily pack an extra one of these, and cost-wise and weight-wise, it doesn't really add that much of a burden. So that's compelling. This is compelling just because of the trackpad and because of the actual keys. One of the weird things about the way this cantilever design functions, and it is eerie, it does look like the iPad is floating above the keyboard here, but one of the problems is that actually the number keys, you kind of butt against the screen when it's at 130 degrees. So the number keys, it kind of gets in the way of the number keys a little bit. Bum, 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 bum. Yeah, the Logitech keys to go is a thing that reminds me of Craig's keyboard. Do your hands hit the bottom of the iPad when you... Yes, they do, Stephen. Wouldn't you just pinch and zoom on the iPad itself? Yeah, I guess so. One of the nice things about the trackpad, though, is that you don't have to touch the screen, which for some of us is a huge plus. I've got a Paper-like on here, and I love that. I really don't like sort of shiny, non-matte finishes on my screens, and so even on my MacBook Pro, I put a privacy protector on it, even if I'm working at home, just because I prefer a matte screen. And one of the things about this is it keeps fingerprints off, so touching it isn't too onerous. But still, it's not 100% free of kind of dust and junk. And so if I can get away with rarely touching the screen, especially when you're doing keyboard work, there's something about ergonomically and in terms of exhaustion, of being able to keep your hands down on the plane of the keyboard and the trackpad instead of moving them up and down, as was the case for the last essentially 18 months of using this. And your arm does get tired, so it's nice to be able to pinch and zoom and do all that down here without having to move up. This is actually a merino wool hat from, I bought it about a decade ago from Jack Spade. That's a company that does not exist anymore. Yeah, so Kevin brings up the point that the YouTube app is not optimized for the trackpad. You feel that in a lot of the apps, and I suspect in the next 6 months we'll get apps that are more sort of optimized and do things like you see here in Ulysses, the cursor, let me see here, try to get it in focus and pull it up. The cursor, when it gets to certain things, kind of snaps. I wrote about this in my Wired article. And that's really satisfying, and it's actually a really lovely thing. And for apps that have not used standard UI components or have used wonky UI components, that doesn't happen, and so that doesn't feel quite natural. And then in a lot of apps too, or games, scrolling isn't tied to actual sort of two-finger scrolling, so that doesn't work as expected. The limited angle you can push back to would be an issue. So I definitely wish this thing would go to maybe, if this is 130 degrees, I would love it to go to like maybe 150. That said, I think the issue, and I'm sure the tests in the secret labs at Apple were all about this, the issue is mainly just weight distribution. This thing is going to flop over if it goes too much further. So while this isn't a totally ideal angle for all situations, I think, considering this keyboard case only offers 2 angles, actually, let's compare these 2 angles on this guy and that guy. So very similar angles between these two these two keyboards. This one is a little bit sharper, a little bit further back. This one looks like it's about 140 maybe, and this one is 130. So that is a real concern. If this angle for you is the perfect angle, then this angle may not be. But just to my point earlier about like incentivizing pulling this thing off of the case, on this case I never took the iPad off because pulling it off was sort of this floppy, horrible experience, whereas with this new Magic Keyboard, it's quite satisfying. Boom, 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 boom. Let's see what else. Question on the side, what are you using for streaming? I am streaming with a, this is an X100V, Fujifilm X100V. I did not buy this to stream. I was not thinking about streaming at all until quarantine times hit, and I started giving myself little challenges to learn new bits of technology. And it turns out that this camera, which is an amazing stills camera, just came out about a month ago. It does, using a mini HDMI jack, pretty great sort of, you can do 4K out actually. This is 1080p, and then just pumping that into OBS, Open Broadcast Studio, an open source app, and then I've got this goofy Logitech thing over here, that is that I've kind of cropped down to be a little bit smaller, just for my head. Let's see here. Does tapping on the attached iPad feel weird? No, it feels really good. It feels super solid. This hinge is crazy. You're seeing a little bit of wobble here, and I think it looks more exaggerated than it is when you're actually using it. If you're using the pencil, you're kind of tapping and holding on here, so it feels great. I mean, it feels so solid, and because of the weight of the thing, and again, this is sort of the negative is having to carry 600 grams of keyboard, which is kind of ridiculous. The positive is that you get all of these sort of peripheral benefits. This feels amazing. I mean, in terms of what's actually going on here. I'm pushing against the screen, and I feel pushing pretty hard actually against the screen. And there's just it does not feel like it's ever going to flop over. So that's pretty incredible. And I think this was a masterstroke of usability and hardware engineering. This is, I mean, I assumed that this was going to fall off all the time if it was sitting on top of the iPad like this, but it's fallen off like maybe one time in the last 18 months. So tapping feels great. Yeah, so like Tom was asking about the folio, you can kind of put it in, you can have the iPad in here and flip it over. I think this has always to me felt insane to have the iPad sitting in here and then you have keys on the bottom. This just feels crazy. This always felt wrong. This felt like a design solution that I am certain the folks inside of Cupertino were going bonkers about. Like, they hated this. I don't know this for a fact, but I can only surmise that this feels like such a suboptimal solution to have the keys on the back that you're kind of pushing in, and then when you put it down on a surface, the keys are being put. It just everything about it. There goes the pencil. Everything about it feels wrong, and so I do not miss that, and I rarely ever used it in that mode. And I think for those of us that did use it in that mode, part of it was because removing it from the case wasn't incentivized. And so again, like, the way this is set up, I'm happy to pull this thing off and do this or sit back with it, lean back with it. And when you pull it off, you realize one of the incredible things is just the iPad is so light and so skinny. This is one of the reasons why, even though I can't do most of my work on an iPad, I can't do any technical stuff, I couldn't stream on an iPad, I couldn't produce podcast stuff. I couldn't do any of my server stuff. It's harder to run your blogs and do server work and run local servers. And you just can't do any of that stuff. But the reason why this thing is so compelling is that it's obvious this is so powerful and it is so tiny. It's really compelling. Anyway, that to me, that combo, this feels as close to magic, more than an iPhone. This feels like truly a miracle device. I don't know. I just wish it could do a little more of the stuff that I like to do. It would be great if you could, say, program on it, which feels kind of fundamental to computing. Let's see here, looking through your questions. Things got updated today. Nice. That's great. Love Things. Things is incredible. And so what's kind of fun, I can show you a little example, even though it's not totally in focus. But like Things, here's Things. You can kind of see what's going on, even though it's blurry. You can just stay right in the keyboard the whole time. Maybe this actually updated, but I know you could do this with the old keyboard too. But you can do, some new to-do, and then you could move things around very easily. You could select multiple things, move blocks of things around, set stuff as done, undo it. Use some of the same keyboard projects as, keyboard shortcuts as on the desktop. So the only thing that doesn't work is the command period. Normally on the desktop is what marks something as complete, whereas on iOS and iPadOS, command period is actually a proxy for the escape key. So if, say, I'm in this this mode to put a to-do into a new project, I want to get out of it, command period gets me out of it. Command period unselects that to-do. So that's pretty incredible. You don't even need the trackpad in Things. It's so good. Yeah, Google, who knows when they'll be updated. Kyle, yeah, typing in the lap feels great. I talked about that a little bit earlier in the stream. Feels totally solid, mainly because it's really heavy. It's just it's an incredibly solid piece of kit. So this is 1.1 kilograms in total. A MacBook Air is something like 1.3 kilograms, or 1.2, and then I think a MacBook Pro 13 inches like 1.36. So it's getting up there to in terms of weight of a proper laptop. Magic Keyboard wants me to have a desktop mode for the iPad. Absolutely, yeah, totally. I mean, I would love for this thing to run Mac OS. To be honest, it's just the screen is incredible. 120 hertz screen, feels so fluid, and you feel it especially in the gestures and moving between apps and activating different things. It just feels so fast. These animations feel so good. And I would love to just have that feeling in Mac OS. I'd love to be able to arrange and run, say, a stream like this using just this guy, or go on site and do a podcast interview with just this machine, sort of in a way that's a little easier than it is to do now. Yeah, the original Origami folding smart keyboard was great. I don't have that. I sold that off a while ago, but that was a really good design. I mean, it was a little bit funky, a little bit weird, but when you got used to it, it was satisfying to kind of flop out, and then snap into the right sort of angle, and it solved the problem of never having the keys exposed on the surface if you're putting it down in tablet mode. Yeah, absolutely, Drew. But yeah, as Tom says, it did add this kind of bulk to the bottom of the case. But I preferred it over this guy. That said, I mean, in the end, I basically never used the iPad. Once iPadOS was kind of updated to its more contemporary version, I almost never use it as a tablet. I only use it in keyboard mode. So the fact that the keys were on the bottom was sort of rarely an issue. Can you move it lower at more of a drawing angle? It looks like you can't, right? John Hicks, no. This is the max. This is as far as it goes. But as I was saying earlier, this is 130 degrees. So as I was saying earlier, the kind of, I think the design, one of the nice design elements of this is that it incentivizes just taking the thing off the case. And so then going into drawing mode like this. But I can imagine for extended drawing sessions where you don't want this thing to just be holding it for an hour or a couple hours, that could be annoying. And it would be nice to have it go to maybe 150 or 160 degrees. Fortunately, this is it. This is the steepest angle. Yeah, you can just kind of take it off and put it on the... What two apps are next to things in your dock? Things. This is a weird dictionary, and then this is a Japanese dictionary. A great Japanese dictionary. This one. It's just called Japanese. It's fantastic. This is just Webster's 1913 dictionary turned into an app. It's available, maybe for $1. There's a whole article about installing this old dictionary. If you search for Mac OS Old Best Dictionary, you'll get this incredible article by James Summers about installing, and he's a writer. He writes for The Atlantic, he writes for The New Yorker, and he's also a very technically proficient guy, and he went through this whole obsession with John McPhee, and John McPhee's writing, and John McPhee talking about dictionaries, and John McPhee, he mentions a couple of definitions that he got from his dictionary, but he never mentions the dictionaries themselves. And so James went and hunted down this dictionary based on the definition, and then managed to figure out how to install it in Mac OS, and someone made an app around. So it's very cool. And then between Safari and Mail is WireGuard. Incredible VPN. I run my own VPN on a DigitalOcean server. It's like $5 a month. And you can easily spin up a new one if you need a new one. It's so fast, great, and a lot of the streaming services haven't blocked it, like you can get sometimes with some of the bigger VPNs. Yeah, the charger port, Peter, I sort of talked about a little bit in the beginning, but so the charger port works as expected. It's just for charging. Purely for charging, and I did a test, and I did 10 minutes of charging with the charger port and 10 minutes of plugging into USB-C over here, and the charger port kicked up the battery 6% in 10 minutes, and USB-C did about 11%. So it's about half as fast as plugging in directly. But if you need to plug other stuff in and charge, that's great. I do have a screen protector on here. This is the Paperlike screen protector, which I love. This is this Paperlike 2. I was using it since Paperlike 1. I think it's great. It feels so much nicer to me to use the pencil with Paperlight on here and to just touch it in general, and it makes the screen matte, which I love. So yeah, I mean, charger port, you can use it while charging. I haven't tried doing super processor intensive things while using this slower charger port, so there may be a situation where if you're doing really processor intensive stuff, that this port can't keep up charging versus the amount of power that's needed on the machine. Paperlike. Yeah, the matte finish feels great. It's so much better. My dream is that the what is it, the nano texture, is that what it's called? The nano texture will get ported over to every screen that Apple makes. Although I know that now there are sort of big issues with durability of it, so you can't. I don't think you can clean it with anything but this specific cloth they give you. So probably not good on a portable device just yet. Okay, so interesting, the power meter there, 2.9 amps versus 2.4. So yeah, so actually it's not quite as slow as, yeah. Anyway, my very quick informal test before going live here was just to check that out. So I think I'm going to wrap up in about 5 minutes if there aren't any other questions. Overall, let me check my notes to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Oh, one thing, yeah, I guess just one general thing is that overall durability of this feels significantly reduced because there are just so many moving parts. All the keys are a moving part. The trackpad itself is a moving part because it doesn't use the Taptic engine. The hinges are two moving parts, and I'm sure composed of many, many, many moving parts within. So it does feel like there are more opportunities for this thing to fail. And obviously we'll see how that goes over time. But for the moment, the build does feel great. But I don't know. One of the great things about traveling with an iPad is that, and I've talked about this before in articles, is that you can kind of just keep ripping things off of it and it still works. You don't need the pencil to do taps. You don't need the keyboard to type. You can just type on the screen. So it feels pretty resilient in that way as a machine you can count on. And you know, it's basically waterproof and all that. It's interesting. You can kind of see the Face ID being triggered over here by this camera. Watch when I unlock this. Face ID is going for it. Huh. Interesting. So I feel like this keyboard case does, you know, reduce a little bit of that sense of durability. But it's pretty neat, and I'm excited to have a thing to use essentially as like a fully complete unit as a writing machine. I will probably strip this machine of anything fun, take off every app that could possibly be distracting, and install Freedom on here, and just use this purely as like a morning writing space, and you know, no distractions, you know, minimal internet connectivity just for backups and stuff like that. But this case incentivizes that kind of, I think, using the machine in that way. Good question about AppleCare. No idea. Oh, this is a good tip for everyone. I'm so excited about this. I just figured this out in the last year. I wish someone told me about this about 10 years ago. If you use a fairly fancy credit card, so if you're paying, say, like a yearly fee of like $100 or more, check out your insurance for product purchases on the credit card. It is likely that your credit card will cover and extend most warranties. So I found out last year when my HomePod died, and I brought it into Apple, and there's no ports, there's no way they can check it, there's no way they can fix it. You can't do anything. When a HomePod is dead, it is just dead forever. It is absolutely infuriating, especially considering how expensive the thing is. And to fix it would require essentially buying a new one. Stupid. And I wasn't, in the end, that enamored by it. So I was a little bit frustrated, and I was looking for ways to alleviate that frustration. And I started looking through credit card insurance. And I noticed that I had purchased this on an American Express card, and I filed a claim. Just kind of, it's one of these things that feels like, because I've literally never heard of anyone doing this, filing a claim for a broken consumer electronics good. It feels like this thing that you are just wasting time with bureaucracy, you know, spitting into the ocean sort of thing. I filed a claim, and like a week later, they refunded the full original price of the HomePod. Pretty amazing, because it was, how old was it then? It was about 1.5 years old, and the HomePod only had a year warranty on it by Apple. And so Amex extends all warranties implicitly by 2 years. This happened again a few months ago. My Leica, which the M10 is, you know, a non-trivially expensive thing, and the leaf shutter on it broke, and it was kind of not activating in the right way. I brought it into Leica to get fixed. $1,200 to fix that shutter, to just replace the shutter. But I had bought the camera. I was actually, it's a complicated story about getting that camera. I was gifted one camera and sold it, and then bought it with a credit card, and yada, yada, yada. Anyway, so the purchase of the camera happened on this credit card. And I thought $1,200, and I'm getting it fixed in Japan, and this is a US credit card, and are they gonna, a week later, I had $1,200 credit in my account. After that, I did the repair and got the repair people to sign a form and sort of explain in English what had happened, and you know, it was minimal amount of paperwork for $1,200. So this guy too bought with the same credit card, so I believe it comes with some kind of warranty, but if you use a decent credit card, you get an extra 2 years. It's kind of crazy. Yeah, looking forward to iOS 14. All right, guys, it is midnight over here in Japan. I'm going to wrap up and go to bed, and I hope you all are having a wonderful Monday. I think it's Monday. Days don't mean anything anymore, but I hope you're all having a great Monday. And if you have this guy or getting this keyboard, enjoy it. If not, enjoy this one. This one's also good. Enjoy this one. This one's not bad either. See ya.